Sisters and brothers. This is Milton Ali Mahdi. Welcome back to Black Star News Show on WBAI 99.5 FM radio. We have our guest for the second hour, Brother Claude Gatebuke. He's the founder of the Great Lakes Action Network, and he's a Rwanda Genocide survivor. Before I welcome my guest for the second half of my show, I want to reach out once again to you, the dear listeners. We need your support. That is how we deliver unfiltered, commercial-free radio, news, and information. So I encourage you to dial 516-620-3602. Any support, any donation is greatly appreciated. You can even do something else by becoming a WBA buddy. If you become a buddy, that means you support the station on a monthly basis. The money is taken out of your credit card or your debit card. And you can do that by going to give, the number 2. So give to WBAI.org. Welcome, Claude Gatebuke. Is Claude connected?
Okay, wait a minute. Just let me just check.
Okay, I think I can hear him in the background. Claude, can you hear me? Yeah, I think I heard him for a second there. Listeners, excuse us. It's been a bit challenging the last couple of weeks because, as you know, we're not.
All right, let's try again.
Okay, Claude, are you here?
Milton. Yes, I'm here.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show, and apologies to listeners. Because of the pandemic, as you know, we don't operate out of the studio. We thank soldiers like Reggie Johnson, who is the engineer, and he is actually at the studio. So that's why frequently we have some of these technical issues. Welcome, Claude Gatebuke. So today, this month of April is the 26th anniversary of the Rwanda Genocide. Now, before I ask you questions about that, I would like you to actually give our listeners an update about the conditions in Rwanda in terms of the pandemic, COVID-19 coronavirus.
Yes, thank you for that. The pandemic in Rwanda has, it's growing. The numbers of infected people are growing. They're over in the mid-100s now. However, there has been no one reported dead or killed by the virus. But that's not to say there haven't been any casualties of the coronavirus pandemic, because when it was announced, when it started spreading on March 20th, the government of Rwanda destroyed houses for poor people in Kigali, and then the next day they issued
the capital city for listeners that are not familiar.
Yes, Kigali is the capital city. I apologize. And then the next day they issued a basically they told everybody stay at home. And my question was, what homes, after you destroyed people's homes and actually exposed them to the disease? Now, in addition, there's been there were 2 people shot by the police for not following these. It's basically, when you look at these stay at home and work from home rules that the government of Rwanda has put in place, it's basically like the U.S., which Rwanda is nothing like the U.S. or a European country. People are subsistence living and subsistence farmers. They need to go to the markets on a daily basis, and the spread is not that fast or that wildly fast based on the numbers. But basically, 2 people were shot, and there was a person who was killed for stealing bananas. And a lot of people are dying of hunger right now. We just don't know the numbers. There was also a report last week by Anjan Sundaram, who is a British journalist, that a friend of his died of coronavirus, but they reported that it was a heart attack. So basically there are casualties, people who are dying of hunger. and people who are being harmed by security forces. And the worst right now are the women still in the capital city of Kigali, in an area known as Banyahe, where soldiers have gone for a few weeks raping the women at gunpoint. They basically go in there and they beat the man, take the men out, and they rape the women at gunpoint. And it has been demonstrated that it's being done by Rwandan soldiers, which is not unusual because we've seen also how they have done it in the Congo over the last 24 years. And so that's kind of the update. It's the Rwandan government has used this coronavirus to step up their repression and atrocities, and also on the journalists. All of the independent journalists who were reporting on the destruction of houses, the people not getting food distributions, and all of these things have been arrested. There's been 10 journalists arrested in the last 3 weeks in Rwanda. And most of them are reporting controversial stories that the government does not want out. And so that is the update on what's going on.
This is similar. This is similar to other African countries as well, such as neighboring Uganda, of course, with the Museveni, Yoweri Museveni dictatorship. But it's very important for them to maintain this facade of perfection, because there's a lot of reports about people also dying of starvation at home, because as you pointed out, many of these countries don't have the social safety nets, and they're not in a position to send checks or cash to people that are confined at home, unlike some of these industrialized countries. And we can go into that toward the end of the show. And to me, I blame most of these leaders, because African economies should not be in the position they are today. China's per capita income was $89 in 1959. Ghana's was $189. So Ghana was about double of China's. Yet look where China is today. And collectively, because of the neocolonial regime in Africa, that's why they're struggling with these basic issues today. So maybe you want to say a little bit about that, and then I would like us to address the issue of the 26th anniversary of the genocide.
You are exactly correct. And what I would add, because I agree with you 100%, is the neocolonialism and the puppets on the continent who have hindered the development of Africa and Africans. And what is happening, though, right now is interesting, because they're also potentially going to be affected, because normally, for example, because they have not built these systems, they've only built strong men instead of building strong systems, as you said. You know, you've got Museveni in Uganda, you've got Kagame in Rwanda, you've got, Nyasimbe in Togo, Biya in Cameroon. All of them, a lot of them just haven't done or provided any services or built the infrastructure to be able to withstand this type of thing, and they're not allowing people to go out. But what is happening is that they normally go to get treatments outside of the African continent.
That's right.
Schooling, they send their children to schools outside of the African continent. They basically get everything outside of the continent, and now they are confined to their countries and are potentially going to lie in the beds that they made for the poor people on the continent. That's what I would add to what you said. And again, this is why it's bad to have puppets. If the people are deciding their own affairs, Africa has so much more potential and do so much better than having basically presidents that are in place to kill, rob, and steal and rape the people.
And look, now that you got me onto that, I can't leave it that quickly. Look at neighboring Uganda.
Yep.
The dictator has fighter jets, that cost millions of dollars, right? Tanks, and he himself flies in a Gulfstream jet, which is worth $50 million. that he bought with, stolen state resources, of course, because, he didn't develop any apps, so he doesn't have that kind of independent money. And yet there's a hospital in Uganda, and I tell this story every time I have an opportunity, in a city called Moroto, Moroto, where dead bodies would remain on hospital beds for up to 5 days. This is in the 21st century. And then contrast that with Cuba. Look what Cuba has done with its minimal resources. Cuba doesn't have the kind of natural resources that most of these countries have. And yet, when it came to the Ebola pandemic, it was Cuba that came to the rescue. This is a serious indictment, and I hope you and other activists like yourself agitate and make sure it is no longer business as usual post this pandemic in Africa.
Absolutely. And people have become more and more equal now as a result of this pandemic. Unfortunately, it's taking lives. But people are waking up to the facade of these dictators. Also, just, maybe to wrap it up here, as far as my comments on that and how these dictators are crippling Africans. Rwanda was the first country to receive relief funds from the IMF, $109 million. It was the very first one, although it has been touted as one of the fastest growing economies. It was the fastest economy to receive an emergency fund to fund or to help with the relief of the coronavirus pandemic. However, the people are not receiving food. The people don't have the basics. Where is that money going? Your guess is as good as mine. But one thing that we know, just a couple months ago, there was a report that showed that a lot of aid money and a lot of funds, foreign funds that went into Rwanda, almost 200 million, went in offshore banks. It was stolen. So now they're asking for more money, to potentially steal. But, had they had this kind of money, maybe they would have supported the people with it. And I don't want to get into some of the nitty-gritty details of the other money that they take from the people and call it emergency funds, but haven't used a dollar of it. It will be a little too confusing for the, I believe, for the audience. And it will take a lot of time to break down.
Our good brother and ancestor, Kwame Nkrumah, is just trembling with rage in his grave and saying, if these people had followed what I preached, that Africa should unite and be one powerful United States of Africa, we wouldn't be discussing these issues today. But our listeners that are just tuning in, you're listening to Black Star News Show. I'm your host, Milton Alimadi, on WBAI 99.5 FM radio. And our guest on the bottom hour of today's program is Claude Gatebuke. He is the founder of the Great Lakes National Action Network. So let's get to the 26th anniversary of the Rwanda Genocide. The genocide that happened 26 years ago. And Paul Kagame, the current president of Rwanda, is credited with having ended this genocide. And the popular narrative is that Hutu extremists and Hutu make up, and correct me if I'm wrong, the majority population, 85%, were inciting ordinary people to target and kill Tutsis, and that they ended up killing up to about 1 million Tutsis. And first of all, I want people to think about the logic, because accepting that narrative at face value without any critique means that you believe that African people are able to be told to go and kill other Africans to the tune of 1 million people because they were incited by extremists. It really takes a kind of mindset that has a very different perception of who Africans really are. But if you see Africans as human beings, I don't think that narrative can be acceptable at face value. So I would like you to explain in the little time that we have left, what is wrong with this narrative and what are some of the inconvenient truths embedded in this narrative?
So let me just share with the audience a little bit of how I survived the genocide, just real quick in 2 minutes. I was living in Kigali when the genocide started. The genocide was set off by the shooting of the plane carrying Rwanda's president, Juvenal Habyarimana, and Cyprien Ntaryamira of Burundi. Those two presidents were on a plane coming from Tanzania into Rwanda and were shot down by Kagame's troops. Kagame, who's the current president and who was a rebel at the time, negotiating a peace deal with with that president, the Rwandan president. That set off an orgy of killings by machetes by the extremist Hutus. Now, what has emerged since is I personally have spoken and have on video one of Kagame's former bodyguards, James Munyandinda, stating that the RPF, the group that Kagame was leading, had infiltrated the groups that were committing the genocide and exacerbated the killings of Tutsi people. No doubt, Tutsi people were hunted down for extermination. However, as it's emerging now, we're seeing more and more evidence that Kagame was also a participant in that genocide. Not only did he start it by shooting the plane, or spark it by shooting the plane, he also, his troops participated in it. I also spoke to one of his former bodyguards, Alois Unyenzi, who has stated in multiple, including in court, that he was in the meeting where Kagame and other leaders such as, I believe it was Kayumba Nyamwasa and James Kabarebe and Theonest Lizinde, pulled up a map, and I apologize for calling out all those names, but hopefully it makes sense. It was a bunch of leaders that were with Kagame, pulled out a map, and they mapped out how they were going to shoot the plane. The other thing that's emerged since, that is wrong with this narrative, that is the simplified narrative of a bunch of crazy, dumb Africans who are told, go kill, and they just kill, was the RPF refused, number one, when their opponents were saying, hey, let's stop fighting and let's save people. There's letters showing those communications. There was also a proposed UN intervention at the end of April 1994. The genocide lasted 3 months until July of 94. There's a letter from one of, two of the former RPF leaders. And again, RPF is the group that Kagame led, the rebel group Kagame led, that was a Tutsi rebellion. By one, Claude Gatebuke and Gerard Gahima. Gerard Gahima lives in the U.S. today. He was a part of the RPF. He was one of the people who signed and told the UN, everybody that's supposed to be killed, all the Tutsis that were to be killed had been killed. There is no need for an intervention. And in fact, the RPF threatened to shoot at any foreign intervention that came into the country because it would have stopped them from seizing power, which is what they ended up doing. And
all right, so Claude, I know you have a lot to tell us, but we're going to run out of time. I wanted to make sure I got through a few questions before we run out of time. So I'm sorry to cut you off a little bit. You are going to be obviously accused, and you have been accused of being a genocide denier. But to listeners who are unfamiliar and are listening to this narrative being offered by Claude today, I also recommend you watch a documentary made by the BBC called Rwanda's Untold Story. And the last time I checked, it was still available on YouTube. So I encourage you to watch that. It's never been broadcast in the United States, but it was produced and broadcast by the BBC, and it's called Rwanda's Untold Story. We're running out of time, but I have a few questions I wanted to ask you. Claude, a listener listening to this narrative for the first time would ask, what motive would Kagame have in, number one, shooting down that plane, and presumably wanted to spark that level of violence? What motive would he have?
So just real quick, for anybody that thinks I'm a genocide denier, I'm actually a survivor of that genocide. I had to dig my own grave. I was made to dig my own grave with my mother, and people intervened on multiple occasions. I almost got killed in that genocide. So I'm a survivor of that genocide.
And how old were you? How old were you when it happened?
I was 14. I was 14.
Please continue.
And the reason that I'm called that this happens is just to harass me to stop talking about the Kagame's involvement in the genocide. And so, what were his motives for shooting the plane and for sparking that amount of violence? There was no way Kagame was going to win an election in Rwanda if there was a peaceful transition of power into a civilian rule, because he was leading a minority group, and he was also coming from outside of the country, and he had devastated all of the parts of the country that he had occupied. In fact, when they ran their own elections inside the territories that they had taken over, they lost all of those elections. So he had to seize power by the gun, and he had the more superior army. And in order to do that, he had to shoot down his opponent, cause that kind of chaos, and justify his seizing of power, and also to use it as blackmail for anybody, Rwandan and otherwise, that would ever speak up against him. And that's what he's done, is basically blackmail.
And by seizing power militarily, brush away the need to hold that election that was had been planned, right? Exactly. I'm sorry, we're run out of time, literally. We will have you back on the show again. I want you to tell listeners how they can get in touch with you so they can learn more information. Your website, your Twitter handle, your email address, please, very quickly before we run out of time.
Yes, our website is www.aglan.org, and my Twitter handle is, our organizational Twitter handle is @AGLANGLR, and my email is claude@aglan.org.
Thank you so much. We'll have you back on the show. Listeners, stay strong, stay Pan-African. Visit Black Star News as well, blackstarnews.com. You can follow me at Ali Mahdi. See you next week.
That is why you need to take a stand. There's pollution all over this land. I don't know how long we'll be here.
Pete Seeger and the Reverend Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick from the first Earth Day. That was 50 years ago in Union Square. Join WBAI as we mark Earth Day from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. On the special, celebrities and musicians will join the youth-led effort to spur climate action on an Earth Day live production. The lineup includes Joaquin Phoenix, the Reverend William Barber, Patricia Arquette, Stacey Abrams, Al Gore, Jane Fonda, Bill McKibben, and more. Organizers say the fight against the coronavirus and the climate crisis go hand in hand. This as we work towards the longer goal of building a society built on sustainability and justice. That's 11 to 9 p.m. on Earth Day, Wednesday, here on listener-sponsored WBAI New York.
I don't know how we'll be here.
Hello, I'm New York State Labor Commissioner Roberta Reardon. New York is at the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic, and many businesses are bearing the brunt. We know that means thousands of New Yorkers' livelihoods are at risk. If you've tried to file for unemployment recently, you may have experienced long wait times on our phones and website. You can help reduce the load on our system by only filing for unemployment on the day of the week that matches your last name. It's important for you to know that every New Yorker who's eligible for unemployment insurance will receive every cent they are owed, even if you file late.
If you are filing a new unemployment insurance claim, the day the New York State Labor Department says you should apply is based on the first letter of your last name. A through F file on Monday from 8 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. G through N file on Tuesday O through Z files on Wednesday. If you missed your day, file on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. The phone number to file for unemployment insurance benefits is 1-888-209-8124. Again, 1-888-209-8124. You can also file online. Go to labor.ny.gov. This is a public service announcement from WBAI New York.
This is WBAI New York 99.5 FM and WBAI.org online. The previous program was Black Star News with Milton Nalamati, and that is heard Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Excuse me. Stay tuned for Keeping Score coming up at the 4 p.m. hour. And just a reminder for all of the listeners, we encourage WBAI